The Modi government has just finished presenting its much awaited budget against the backdrop of really a serious economic slowdown, a serious long-term structural decline in consumer demand, and a whole lot of other problems. So much so that some of the government establishment economists have been writing in newspapers and asking for a 1991 reforms moment from the Modi government. Now, this seems to have come as a bit of a compliment to the Congress party and the Narasimha Rao government that ushered in the reforms of 1991. So we have with us in our studio today Praveen Chakravarty, who is the chairperson of the All India Professionals Congress, a wing of the Congress party. Much more than that, he is an important member of the Congress party economic think tank, and is a political economist, has been writing and commenting on the economic policies of the government, and has also been very active in evolving the Congress party's economic manifesto over the years. Welcome to our show, Praveen. My first question to you will be, what do you make of this eagerness or great desire on the part of establishment economists that we are seeing, who are asking and urging Modi and Nirmala Sitharaman to bring in the 1991 reforms moment?
I think first, it certainly is a compliment to and an acknowledgement, even if it's belated, that it's really the Congress party that actually ushered in the new economic dogma, the doctrine that our country has followed for the last 30, 40 years. I could sense, the need for reform and change and fresh thinking was very palpable in Venu. I don't know, you've seen many budgets. Did you notice the utter lack of enthusiasm among the treasury benches today? Yeah. The treasury benches were not excited. They were not save for one kind of announcement about tax cuts, which we'll probably come to, but and that is a very clear indictment of Ms. Nirmala Sitharaman, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman's handling of the economy. And this is her 8th budget that she presented. She's perhaps overstayed by 6 budgets.
Okay, so Praveen, tell me, the build-up expectation was that it will be a big bang budget, going by what many of the, as I said, establishment economists were suggesting and writing in the newspapers, and there was one theme which was clearly playing out in the past 4 or 5 weeks, which is that the middle class in India has borne the brunt of the economic slowdown in the country, and they have not got any relief in the last 10 years, hardly any relief, whereas the corporates have got huge tax cuts, and there was a feeling that the bottom 20-30% of the population also got a fair amount of tax cash transfers from the government, very poor, as also PM Kisan and various schemes, women getting cash transfers, as well as the free food scheme, which this government has continued over the last many years. So the middle class, it was felt, was left to fend for itself. Do you think the middle class has got anything this time? I want to ask you. I want you to answer this question, and after that we'll come to some of the broader aspects of the economy and the budget. Yeah.
See, I think the general kind of feeling was that private investment has not taken off, and private investment did not take off because they said there was no demand for goods, and there was no consumption demand. There was no consumption demand because the middle class didn't have the ability to spend, the extra capacity to spend more. And hence the kind of expectation was that there would be some sort of a boost for middle class consumption through the form of tax cuts. Now we saw one announcement that has really caught the attention and the headlines of all media, which is this big tax increase in tax slab for zero income tax to from 7 lakhs to 12 lakhs. Now it remains to be seen how much of an effect that it has on consumption. Because I'll tell you why I think the government itself is very nervous about this stimulating consumption. If this were to stimulate consumption, then this should have shown up either in increased expectations of GST revenues or corporate tax revenues. But actually, no. Of the increase in revenues that the government is expecting, they still expect the maximum number of the highest increase from the income taxpayers. So there's something amiss here, and hence I think it's somewhat confusing and muddled. I think this whole income tax cut, the slab increase. I actually think what should have happened is the finance minister should have just made a categorical statement that our indirect tax rates are extremely high, and that is the one that's really hurting consumption. So even though the actual rates will be decided in the GST Council, we as the union government will endeavor to keep GST rates low. We will minimize GST rate. That should have been the statement that should have come from the finance minister.
Sure. Yeah. In a way, what you're saying makes logical sense, because some others have also pointed out that if they had simply reduced the excise duty cum cess on petrol, diesel, etc. by 5-6 rupees, it would have had a far greater impact on the in terms of disposable income in people's hands, because the tax cut would merely put a little more money in the hands of the taxpayers, which we all know is a very small number. The actual number of taxpayers are probably 2.5 or 2.6 crores. So in a sense, what you're saying does make sense. But Praveen, let's come to the big picture, which is, it is admitted by a lot of people, even within the government, that there are structural issues with the economy which have not been addressed over the last 10 years. This government has tried everything. In 2019 they really dropped corporate tax to an all-time low, 15% for new manufacturing and 22% for other companies, 25% including cess, etc. It didn't work. Then they tried a massive increase in capital expenditure. They thought that the government capital expenditure would do the heavy lifting, and the economy will recover as it would crowd in private investment. Did not happen. So a lot of their strategies have been failing, and against this backdrop comes this budget, and against this backdrop a lot of, as I said, establishment economists screaming for a 1991 moment. And against this backdrop of this budget, an economic survey saying that there is a trust deficit that businesses have this government, trust deficit that people have with this government, and unless regulations are made principle based and trust based, things won't improve. Now, something like this was also said by a former advisor to this government, Arvind Subramaniam, in a conversation with Karan Thapar on The Wire, where he said that this government has to change its DNA. It has to change its very instincts in the way it runs the economy, or the way it steers the economy. What do you have to say about that? Do you think some of the structural issues are addressed, or does this budget do anything to them, or is it business as usual?
Venu, speaking of 1991 reforms, the need for something like that, and speaking of trust deficit, I would actually point you to an article by the father of 1991 reforms and former Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh in October 2019 in the
Yeah.
Hindu newspaper.
Very
And I know
mentioned
that
first.
and I know that well because I was kind of very closely involved in working with him in the drafting of that article. And in 2019 October, he said the fountainhead of India's economic malaise is trust deficit and this view of the Modi government that everyone is guilty until proven innocent. And he said, this is the structural mindset change that I would urge the Prime Minister to take so that the economy can prosper. 5, 6 years later, you've got two former economic advisors of the Modi government saying the same thing. If only Dr. Manmohan Singh, as always, had been heeded to back in 2019, we wouldn't have been sitting here discussing it. So it is absolutely right. I think for all of us as economists, we tend to get lost in the policy details of corporate tax cut and production-linked incentives and all these things. I think the fundamental thing that is needed is for the government to tell businesses and participants in the economy that we trust you. You're not guilty until proven innocent. You're innocent until proven guilty. That alone will unleash the so-called animal spirits. And I think I must appreciate Anant Nageshwar and the chief economic advisor for actually coming out and saying this boldly. In fact, to the extent that he actually said, "Get out of the way." And these are his words. And he's, it's very clear that he's telling his own government as well as state governments. Now, I think there's where the DNA problem is for the Modi government is I think this entire mindset of control. I think their entire governance paradigm stems from one of control. And that is the way the Prime Minister Modi runs his cabinet. That's the way they run their party, which is you tell a cabinet minister or a BJP member what to do and they immediately obey. They think the same thing will apply for economy. They think if you tell the economy grow at 6%, it'll grow at 6%. Or you tell the private sector you have to invest and it'll invest. No, I mean, one advisor in the PMO calling an industrialist and saying, coercing them to kind of appreciate Modi and sing praises for Modi is very different from asking them to invest. The two are not the same. And this is the fundamental difference.
Yeah. So Praveen, can you further elaborate the components of this trust deficit? It is not, Praveen, just the government. Of course, the government is the main contributor since it runs all the regulatory agencies and it runs all the investigative agencies. The government is the prime mover of the prime source of this trust. The state is the main source of this trust that is to be built with the business, which is what Anant Nageshwaran also says. The primary responsibility is that of the government. There is another, Praveen, source of trust deficit among businesses who are not investing, both domestic and foreign businesses. Something that Arvind Subramaniam also alludes to in his conversation with Karan Thapar on The Wire, where he describes this as the national champion policy risk. And what he's alluding to, he didn't elaborate it, but clearly what he's alluding to is that this government has decided that it'll create 4 or 5 or 6, half a dozen national champions. Big corporate houses will be given the boost, and this government has put a lot of its eggs, most of its eggs, in that basket, thinking that they will lift the economy. What that does is it discourages a lot of other smaller players to invest in those areas because they fear that they won't get the same kind of encouragement as these so-called national champions. And even if they build businesses in those areas, there have been instances in the past of some of these national champions going and buying off through coercive methods those businesses. Now, how do you see this as part of the trust deficit in the context of why private investors are not coming forward to invest. And mind you, foreign direct investment is at its lowest in several decades. Somebody told me in 2024 it has fallen to 0.3% of GDP. And as Arvind Subramaniam has been saying, that the long term average has been 2.5%. So how do you see this aspect of the trust deficit?
See, absolutely, Venu. I think it's very well known that cronyism is the biggest threat to free market capitalism. And what we have today is, I think the kind of nice term for it is national champions. But the real term, the honest term for that is cronyism. And when certain businesses or certain business groups are favored and they almost act as state, they behave as actors, state agents, it kills private enterprise. It kills private enterprise because of the various fears. And you must understand, it is a toxic combination of the two. First, the state induces distrust, mistrust, fear with that very first move of demonetization, sudden demonetization, then GST, then and then you've got extreme kind of favoritism for one or two or few business groups, to the extent that you use state agencies to help their businesses. And also, let's call a spade a spade. Our foreign policy today is almost like a business advocacy for one or two groups, including, our foreign policy was turned into something like that, right? We all know of power contracts from Sri Lanka to Bangladesh to Nepal to everywhere. So, and I think so. This absolutely will instill fear, distrust, and kill private enterprise, which is why you find that private investment has been tepid for a decade. Once you do all this and you've broken that trust, how much ever tax cuts and corporate tax cuts and coercing and all of that you do, they're not going to invest. If they want, they'll sing praises for you on social media and praise the prime minister and all of that, but they're not going to invest. And that's what's happened.
True. So basically you're saying that the budget really cannot address the big trust deficit or trust gap which the economic survey talks about, right? Isn't that what you're saying? The budget itself can't do it.
The budget. Yeah. A statement from the prime minister can do it. But yeah.
So Praveen, coming back to some of the budget elements of the budget numbers, the budget projects a growth, GDP growth of 10%, 10.1%. Now, would you call that growth pessimism? With all this big boost to the middle class, this intended boost to consumption, is the government hoping for just a nominal growth of 10%? If inflation is around 4.5%, I'm assuming a benign inflation scenario, then you actually looking at a growth of just about 5.5 to 6%. So would you describe this as growth optimism or growth pessimism?
No, I would describe this as acceptance of the fact that without something very like a structural change in our economic approach, in our economic policy doctrine, this is what we should live with. That's really the message of the budget, if you ask me. We can tinker here and change the tax rates a bit and change allocations a bit and all of that, and this is what you're going to get. But if we have to kind of go to, say, 12, 13, 14% nominal growth, especially when we start talking about, okay, is there a China plus one opportunity? Do we have an opportunity that's come our way with President Trump in America and the anti-China rhetoric? And what can we do? And when there are so many of these things, unless and until we had that really kind of step back and like you started out saying, the 1991 moment, where if we don't do that, we'll only get this. And this is essentially what the budget is saying, which is we don't have the courage or the conviction for a 1991 type reform. So let's just tinker around and be satisfied with some 10%, 11%, 10.5% nominal GDP. And that's really sad, because we can do a lot more and better as a nation.
Now, Praveen, I come to another very important issue, which is much debated for the last 6-7 years. India has witnessed a very sharp decline in productive employment, and the unemployment rates, especially youth unemployment rates, have never been this high in our economy, which is now admitted by everybody. So last year's budget seemed to have started recognize this, and last year's budget seemed to address the unemployment problem, especially in the organized sector, by coming up with a big initiative, which is this Nirmala Sitharaman's budget speech last year, which said that more than 1 crore youth would be brought under this apprenticeship scheme, and they would be linked, connected with large number of corporate sector, large number of companies, 500 plus companies, and they would be incentivized to work as apprentices there, and then eventually they would be incentivized to be absorbed in those companies. Strangely, in this budget, I was waiting for the word employment, and I was waiting for an update on what happened to that scheme, the much touted scheme last year, which interestingly was part of the Congress manifesto in the 2024 before the 2024 elections. And I remember after the last budget, you and former Finance Minister P. Chidambaram also at least commended the government for taking the right advice, if anything, from the Congress manifesto. What happened to employment?
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the most conspicuous, absence in today's budget speech by the finance minister. I mean, the word jobs or employment was not uttered. But more importantly, I mean, I think this whole internship scheme, in terms of, how did it go? What was the update? What is the new allocation in the budget? How many people are going to get jobs or trained? No mention of that at all. And as someone who actually personally was very kind of, involved in the formulation of this idea for our manifesto, for the Congress Party manifesto, we truly believe in the potential. We still believe in the potential of this idea. And I suspect that the finance minister is perhaps not getting the encouragement from our fellow cabinet ministers, or I don't know what happened, but there was absolutely no mention of it. And I would still urge the finance minister to actually not go slow or give up on this. I do think the budget allocation has been increased when I saw the numbers in the fine print. But I mean, there was no kind of table thumping when and no follow up on to this compared to what they did in the budget announcement last year. So I don't know. I just hope that they don't go slow on this, because it's extremely critical.
Is the Congress Party as opposition keeping track of what's happening on that scheme, since you were the first to throw up that idea in the system, in the larger before the parliament elections? So
Yeah.
do you have any idea as to where that scheme is headed? Where is it at?
Yeah, so I think I have investigated a little bit. I mean, they say they have about 1 lakh of people who are placed in certain companies. But I think very typical to the Modi government, what they've done is they just called up a bunch of corporates and almost forced them to take these people. They've not really understood the spirit behind the program. And so I've spoken to a bunch of companies. They almost feel coerced in having to do this, as opposed to seeing the value of it and being told the value of it. And I think that's where once again this whole doctrine of control has led to this mistrust about this scheme also between corporates and the government, and that's really sad. So I have followed up on what is happening on the ground on this particular scheme.
Praveen, another very critical question and a serious one which stares at all of us, especially at the policymakers, at the government, is which way is the currency headed? Now, there was no talk about the currency in the budget. Of course, budget is not meant to talk about the rupee, but budget would definitely assume a certain value of the rupee while making its projection for oil imports, for various for its imports, for its for exports, for international trade, etc. And so, what do you think is happening with the rupee? Because following Trump's takeover as president after he took charge, and even before that, following Trump's big announcements for the American economy, 15% corporate tax, tariffs, and big incentives, big deregulation in the US, it seems that a lot of foreign capital is almost like a herd mentality, moving towards back to the US, and it's affecting the currencies across the emerging markets, in India also quite a bit. So how do you see the currency play out, and its impact on inflation, its impact on stability, financial stability, etc.? The budget did not talk much about that. I don't know whether the economic survey spoke in detail about this. What's your sense?
Yeah, I think the economic survey does allude to foreign exchange reserves. See, basically, what is the situation with our currency? Some economists, including the former chief economic advisor Venu Subramaniam, have said that India, under the previous RBI governor Shaktikanta Das, was actively pegging or holding the rupee level and not letting it find its natural level, which they thought should be much lower. So, and they've given out some estimates saying $200 billion of forex reserves were used up.
220 billion, he said, yeah,
220 billion were used up to prop up the rupee. Now, with the change in RBI governor, and interestingly, Venu, if you notice, in the budget, the finance minister talked about 4 pillars. The 4th pillar was actually exports.
Yeah.
This is the first time that the finance minister actually used exports as a pillar. Now, we know for exports, we of course need, there are various things that an economy needs to export better, which is, preferential access to markets outside, free trade agreements, import duty slashing, but also very importantly is currency.
Currency,
the level of currency, the exchange rate matters extremely. Exports is very sensitive to exchange rate. So by virtue of having kind of placed a bet on exports as one of the pillars, I suspect that the finance minister is alluding to the idea that the rupee can go down even more without saying it more explicitly, which is what we've seen happen with the rupee. So I suspect that we will continue to see a deterioration or the rupee sliding weaker against the dollar, which some could argue could help exports, but we could also have imported inflation at that level, so strike that balance.
Yeah. Although Praveen, history tells us, I'm talking about history post-reforms, last 35 years of history tells us that merely depreciating the currency does not help exports. A lot of other markers, other fundamentals go into building exports. So under the Modi regime, of course, merchandise exports have been more or less flat. They have not grown at all. One doesn't know whether rupee depreciation of the rupee by another 5% will indeed help exports at all or not. We will know that because after the budget, normally there is a trade policy which comes from the Commerce Ministry. So we will know what sort of targets they set for exports. But here, there's another point I would like to make, Praveen, which was also raised by Arvind Subramaniam. Interestingly, Arvind Subramaniam said that when we say that there is lack of demand in the economy, which is why things are not picking up, economy is not reviving. It's a bit of a misnomer, because Arvind says that you have to consider the entire global market as your demand generator, right? So therefore the exports come in. So if you it's not as if demand was not was sluggish in India, demand was doing all right in the rest of the world, in the US, in other places. So why is it that India could not exploit demand outside of India? Now that is a whole different question. Are we competitive enough to do that? Are our exports competitive? So it creates that's probably part of the structural problem. So how do you see that? Do you think India is ready to sort of Indian exports are ready to take off, or in any way really supplement the GDP growth? After all, our foreign trade is nearly 45% of our GDP, so a very big component. So do you think foreign trade is would be a driver, since you say Nirmala Sitharaman spoke about exports as the fourth pillar?
See, we know our, in fact, when we had it in our manifesto too, I think we are very clear in the Congress party that exports is a very, very critical component for India's economic growth. We've always seen this. In fact, one of the highest exports, I think, reached about 35-40%, was during UPA 1. And you're right. See, for exports, there is, of course, global demand. There is, of course, I think there are two fundamental mistakes that this Modi government's made, which is a regressive view on trade agreements, and second is on import duties. We've almost, reversed all of the import duty cuts that we had made since 1991, and we've gone back to those levels. And any economist will tell you that an import duty is an export tax. So I think that's where we've had two problems. As far as global demand is concerned, I think one is global demand. Even if global demand growth is somewhat tepid, we can get market share. We can get market share from other countries, such as China, especially even if we get 5-10% of the market share that China vacates, that will be a significant jump for us in terms of our exports. And I think there is a big opportunity. It is for us to squander. I think it is very, very important that we have to do what is best for us. We can't mimic or copy others in terms of economic nationalism and those types of things. We have to be focused on exports, because that's what will create jobs, incomes, and prosperity.
Yeah, in a way, even the former head of Niti Aayog, economist Arvind Panagaria, has been pretty critical of the way this government has raised duties consistently over the last 8-10 years, which according to him has prevented India from or made it more difficult for India to become part of the global supply chain. So that's a whole different problem, and very serious problem. So Praveen, so finally I want to ask you, how do you see the American policies in the next, say, 6 months impact India? Where are India's vulnerabilities? Because the budget cannot address that, because the budget doesn't. We cannot anticipate what Trump might do. So, just finally, where are the vulnerabilities?
I think the biggest uncertainty and the vulnerability is in our ability to access the American market for India's goods and services. I think any roadblock to that would have severe repercussions for our economy, for our ability to create jobs and incomes. And I think that's the real worry. I'm not saying that with President Trump there, we would necessarily be negatively impacted. I'm not saying that. We could also have a positive impact if we can work out a way in which we have access to the American markets, and we kind of strike a deal with them. But I just hope that the Modi government looks at it in a more holistic manner than in a more transactional manner, and our need to access the American markets for India's goods and services.
Yeah. And finally, Praveen, there's a lot of accent on attracting FDI, making FDI more attractive via less regulation, whatever, single window, ease of doing business. In both the economic survey and the budget also talks about attracting FDI on a kind of war footing, because foreign investment has really plummeted. Now, from the last economic survey said that India should also attract investment from China. China has a lot of money to invest, and it has also a lot of technology in solar sector, EVs. There was a big emphasis on solar sector and EVs in the current budget. So do you think it's time for India also to invite investment from China on a more consistent basis with a full policy framework aimed at that?
See, whether it is China or America, I think what is it that we're doing today in terms of foreign investment? I mean, you talked about how our foreign FDI is at an all-time low. Why is that the case? And let's analyze it through one example, right? So let us say this American semiconductor company, Micron or Foxconn, they want to come and set up in India. We should just be telling them, please come and choose your place and go wherever. Instead, what are we doing? They're getting calls from the Prime Minister and his cabinet minister saying, don't go to Maharashtra, don't go to Tamil Nadu, go to Gujarat and take this land, and make sure these people are your vendors. I mean, when you start to exercise control over foreign investments like this, it doesn't matter whether it is Chinese or American or Nicaraguan, no foreign investment is coming to India at this rate. So it goes back to what the chief economic advisor said: get out of the way.
Okay. So is that the central message you'll take from the economic survey as well as the budget? What you just said?
It's actually, absolutely, and it's a very sane message. But the message is aimed primarily for the prime minister and his government, which is, you're too much in the hairs of industrialists and businesses. Get out of the way.
So thank you, Praveen Chakravarty, for talking to us. You've been pretty candid in expressing your views, and we'll meet again. Thank you.
Thank you, Venu.